As long as I can remember, I've been obsessed with Star Wars. From the movies, TV shows, video games, and even the books, I spent much of my childhood consuming as much Star Wars content as I could. And naturally, being a fan of the science fiction genre, I'd hear about Alien often. It's commonly referred to as one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. I'd often be told about how it was influenced by some of my favorite franchises, and would go on to inspire even more of my favorites. Yet one thing always prevented me from finally watching the film. It wasn't considered just a science fiction movie, but it was also a horror movie, and I've never particularly liked horror. To be honest, the farthest I've delved into the genre is the Quiet Place franchise, which I've been told at length by many horror fans is only borderline horror to begin with. I just never saw the appeal in watching a movie to be scared. Now, I'm not against a good jump scare or two in a thriller, but 2 hours full of that just seemed tiring. Recently though, with the release of the newest entry in the Alien franchise, my curiosity was piqued. So I decided that for the month of October, I'll be diving into the first 4 films in the Alien franchise. Those being Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection. And of course, we'll be starting with the 1979 original, Alien. Directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, Alien tells a story of space truckers who come in contact with an extraterrestrial organism. Upon release, it did well at the box office, but received mixed reviews. Almost 50 years later though, and Alien is considered a landmark title in both the sci-fi and horror genres. Some even go so far as to say that it's one of the greatest films ever made in either genre. Because of this near universal praise and its continued presence in pop culture, I went into Alien with high expectations. Did it meet those expectations? Is Alien really one of the greatest science fiction films ever made? Or has its legacy been exaggerated? Nowadays, science fiction is a mainstream genre. That wasn't always the case though. Films like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey and Planet of the Apes were popular in the late 60s. However, the late 70s was when the genre would really take off. 1977 marked the beginning of this revolution with the release of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars. Star Wars in particular took the world by storm and made it clear that audiences wanted more sci-fi. 20th Century Fox, aiming to capitalize on this trend, picked up the first script they had lying around, which happened to be Alien. They had previously acquired the script from Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, who signed a deal with Brandywine, a production company with ties to Fox. After signing this deal with Brandywine, the script Shusett and O'Bannon submitted received heavy rewrites and revisions from producers David Giler and Walter Hill. They notably made the dialogue more natural, which is one of the narrative's greatest strengths. Another thing they brought to this story was the addition of the twist that Ash was an android, and I'm really glad this made it into the final cut. In a story like this, I believe that it's essential that there are multiple sources of conflict, whether that be from external sources or complex relationships between the characters. As cool as the alien is, if it was the only source of conflict, at some point the narrative could become dull. However, up to this point in the story, the crew has no one to rely on except each other. Though they may not get along perfectly, there is a measure of trust between them. Ash's betrayal subverts this and is revealed at the perfect time, as it serves to increase the stakes while also temporarily distracting from the alien. This ensures that its next appearance feels nearly as fresh as the first. Despite these major additions, however, Giler and Hill were not credited as writers, with O'Bannon receiving the sole writing credit. Either way, Alien was soon greenlit and pre-production officially began. The first order of business was finding a director. Many were offered the job, with it eventually being given to Ridley Scott. And while he may be a legend now, he only had one film under his belt before Alien. The producers were impressed with it though, and offered him the job. And immediately this proved to be the correct decision. Ridley Scott prepared detailed storyboards and presented them to the executives at Fox, with them being so impressed that they soon doubled the production's budget. Scott also made it clear what direction this project was going in tonally. Rather than leaning into fantasy elements like Star Wars, Alien would lean into horror, with Scott describing it as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of science fiction. And while blending science fiction and horror may sound perfect, it's actually an intensely difficult endeavor, especially back then. There are bound to be many larger-than-life elements in a science fiction story. These have to be portrayed in a convincing way so as to not break the audience's immersion. If something isn't believable, even for a second, all the tension that may have been building for an entire sequence could dissipate in an instant. The first step in avoiding this pitfall is going with the right design, both for the alien and the setting. O'Bannon and Scott were immediately drawn to the work of H.R. Giger. They knew they wanted him to come up with designs for them, and soon convinced Fox to hire him. He designed each phase of the alien and also the planetoid where the alien was found. And it goes without saying that he did a fantastic job. It's unlikely audiences would still be talking about this film 50 years later if the designs weren't incredible. The alien looks primal and intentionally venereal, which works well with the themes of the story. And this design philosophy carried over to the planetoid and derelict spacecraft. These environments elicit the same terror as the alien, and the soundtrack assists in creating these feelings of suspense. Speaking of the derelict spacecraft though, this was probably the most surprising shot to me on my initial viewing. Up to this point, the visuals were impressive, but the sheer scale of the alien here was incredible. To achieve this effect, child actors were put into smaller spacesuits. This made the model and set as a whole feel just that much larger. And that's another thing Alien does expertly. It knows when to dazzle the audience and when to obscure things. While shots on the planetoid are from farther out, creating a larger sense of scale, shots on the Nostromo are much tighter, which makes the whole area feel claustrophobic. And when it comes to the alien itself, it's often obscured entirely, which leaves the audience's imagination to fill in the blanks. While the design of the alien often gets the praise it rightfully deserves, one aspect of the production design that may fly under the radar are the sets, particularly that of the Nostromo. The Nostromo is a cargo vessel. It isn't the pinnacle of technology in this universe. With that in mind, it was designed to look slightly worn or used. And this idea was partly inspired by Star Wars aesthetic, where technologies and settings are made intentionally worn in order to signal to the audience that these things are common. Despite the audience never really receiving any information about the world of Alien, we still learn a lot about it through the set design. The world of Alien feels fully realized, despite almost the entire movie taking place on the Nostromo. The fact that multiple people had a hand in the production design is also likely what helped in fleshing out this world. For example, some designs came from Ron Cobb, others from Giger, some from Ridley Scott, and even some from O'Bannon. By having different elements designed by different people, there's clear variety, a variety that reflects real life. And in this variety, contrasts are created. Yet with elements that should be similar in appearance, like the various stages of the alien, one designer was tasked with creating all the forms. This reflects a realistic homogeny. I genuinely cannot overstate how much I love the production design in Alien. It's already an aesthetic that I appreciate due to its clear inspiration from Star Wars. However, it's also wonderfully distinct through its reflection of reality. Completing this grungier sci-fi aesthetic are the characters. The way they speak and interact with each other feels natural, and this is one of the most important aspects of Alien in my opinion. These aren't scientists or explorers, they're just people who work on a cargo ship. They are regular people put in an impossible situation, just trying to do their best to survive. There is a certain appealing quality to that level of relatability. We can easily put ourselves in the shoes of the crew of the Nostromo. This means that every loss and new discovery is felt even more by the audience. Also, since these aren't professionals, we can better excuse some of the mistakes they make in this story, along with their emotional outburst. This realism works to take this larger-than-life story and ground it enough so that the atmosphere can become familiar to the audience. This speaks both to the quality of the writing and the acting. Every cast member does an excellent job here, with my favorites including Sigourney Weaver as Ripley, Yvette Koto as Parker, Ian Holm as Ash, and Veronica Cartwright as Lambert. While Lambert may be the most frustrating character in the cast, she was absolutely essential. Aside from her, every other character handles the alien threat fairly calmly considering the circumstances. There needed to be at least one character who responded more emotionally in order to achieve the relatability this film strives for. And for all her emotional outburst, she actually turns out to be right about their only chance for survival being to run away. As for Ian Holm, he definitely had one of the more difficult roles in the cast, considering he was playing an android pretending to be human. And his performance is a big reason why this reveal works. There is a certain quality about Ash that makes the audience distrusting toward him. Yet it's not made so obvious that it's clear what his true motivations are. It's just enough so that in retrospect, the audience can see the signs. Another great performance is Yvette Koto as Parker. Early on in the story, Parker is annoying for lack of a better term. He's constantly pestering the captain about his pay, and he seems lazy. As soon as the threat reveals itself though, Parker immediately proves himself to be the most reliable person on the ship. He doesn't hesitate to protect others and try to eliminate the threat. In fact, he only dies because he sacrifices himself trying to give Lambert a chance to escape. He's well written and portrayed expertly by Yvette Koto. And finally, of course, we have to discuss the protagonist, Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. Prior to Alien, Sigourney Weaver was almost entirely unknown. Despite that, she did an excellent job in this role. While Ripley is the protagonist of Alien, the film does something interesting, where it's not immediately clear who the main character is. When we first meet the crew, they're just waking up, and the first to get up is Kane, played by John Hurt. We may assume at first that this is our protagonist, but then our focus quickly shifts more broadly to the rest of the cast. We then may assume that Dallas is our protagonist, with him being the captain and all. After Ripley's conversation with Dallas, though, about not trusting Ash, it becomes clear who the protagonist is. And this is only further established when Kane dies. Speaking of Kane's death, we have to discuss the chestburster scene. It is easily the single most iconic scene in this film, and one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history. It's a masterful combination of excellent writing and practical effects. There is a bit of foreshadowing earlier in the narrative, when Dallas inspects the fossil in the spacecraft and says that the bones are bent outward. Still, it's unlikely that a viewer picks up on this on their first viewing. Looking back though, an audience member will likely remember that moment, just adding to the intensity of the scene. All of this not to mention the performances, which come off as profoundly genuine, mostly because they are. While obviously the cast knew it was going to happen, they had the script after all. They didn't know just how much fake blood was going to shoot out, so when they found themselves completely covered in it, those shocked reactions were genuine. Back to Ripley though. The reason it's especially interesting that the protagonist is initially hidden is simply because of the fact that it's a woman. For a blockbuster in 1979, it was an unexpected move. Of course, a woman being the main character in a horror movie isn't exactly a revolutionary concept, but what was revolutionary was her characterization. She wasn't just a crew member. She's third in command on this ship, and she didn't survive due to luck or someone sacrificing themselves so she could get away. Instead, by the end of the narrative, it can really be said that she beat the alien. She's more of an action hero than a horror protagonist. I think this shot right here might be one of the most important in the entire film. It says so much about her character, especially at a time when we don't even know who our protagonist is yet. She's clearly stressed about what's going on, yet she isn't wearing this emotion on her sleeve. Instead, she's calmly analyzing the distress signal to try and get a better idea of what they're dealing with. Also, this is more of a compliment toward the costume designer, but having her wear Converse also helps in making these characters feel more relatable. The best thing about Ripley, though, is that the further we get into the narrative, the more likable her character becomes. At first, she may seem cold and uncaring since she was willing to leave Kane outside. However, as we learn of the true threat the alien poses, we realize that she was right all along. She doesn't abide by the rules just for the sake of it. Instead, it's out of a genuine desire to keep everyone safe. Her cool demeanor helps her to lead the crew of the Nostromo, yet she is still capable of expressing emotions when it makes sense to do so. This ensures that she remains relatable to the audience. Even in these moments, however, where she expresses fear, anger, or sadness, she still completes whatever task is required of her. A particular favorite moment of mine is the scene where she attempts to cancel the self-destruct sequence. She's clearly afraid, yet she isn't shaking or fumbling through the sequence. When she eventually fails, she has a quick emotional outburst, yet she immediately gets back to work trying to ensure her survival. All of this not to mention Ripley's final encounter with the alien on the shuttle, which cemented her as one of my favorite film protagonists ever. One thing I found myself pondering all throughout my first viewing of Alien, though, was why it was scary. We never see much of the alien itself, and we never really see what he actually does to those he attacks. Yet I think that's exactly why the horror works. Our minds fill in the blanks, which is infinitely worse than anything they could have convincingly portrayed back then. Another element of Alien that adds to the fear factor, which has already been discussed at length by many others, is the fact that Alien preys on the viewer's carnal fears. Due to the intentionally phallic design of the alien and the way it reproduces, the narrative subconsciously activates an audience member's fear of violation. Because so much in the story is left to interpretation, audience members make these connections largely subconsciously, and are then made afraid, perhaps without knowing why exactly they're afraid. It's designed to make the audience uncomfortable. It's an interesting idea, and it works well within the narrative. The design, visuals, and story all come together to add an additional yet necessary element to the horror. I say necessary because, while Alien does have some jump scares, from a visual standpoint, it really isn't a very scary movie. These themes end up being the most disturbing part of the film by the end of it. This was a dangerous concept to experiment with, though. If handled incorrectly, it could have come off as unnecessary, immature, and tasteless. However, I do think it is executed well here, especially since the audience isn't made overtly aware of these themes. There are more themes present in Alien, though, namely that of corporate greed. The whole reason the crew of the Nostromo even get into this mess in the first place is because they were sent by the unnamed corporation to investigate the planetoid. The corporation knew what was down there, and knew that the members of the crew may not survive, yet they still took that risk in order to collect the alien. And I love the scene where this is revealed to the audience and to Ripley. She was skeptical of Ash and the distress signal from the beginning, and now members of her crew are dead. Members of the crew that she's now in charge of following the death of Dallas. No doubt she feels a measure of guilt because of this, and because of her aforementioned desire to protect her crew, this feeling is only made worse. Also, in general, to discover that her suffering was no accident and that her crew didn't just die, but instead were sacrificed for the sake of a nameless corporate overlord is heartbreaking. This makes each death carry even more weight and strengthens the audience's desire for Ripley to win in the end. As I mentioned at the outset, I'd often heard about how Alien was inspired by my favorite franchises, and went on to inspire more of my favorites. And after finally watching it for myself, I was genuinely surprised by how true this was. The inspiration from Star Wars is clear, but it also went on to inspire one of my favorite video game series, Metroid. The main character in Metroid, Samus Aran, is based on Ripley. A primary antagonist of the series is named after director Ridley Scott. The computer Mother is referenced by the original game's final boss, Mother Brain, and the final escape sequence present in each game is taken from the escape from the self-destructing ship in this film. Also, Ripley saving Jones could have been what inspired the option to save the animals in Super Metroid. Noticing the clear influence Alien had on Metroid during my initial viewing made the legacy of this franchise evident to me personally. For this video, I also watched both the original theatrical release and the director's cut, just for the sake of being thorough. And aside from one scene, I honestly couldn't tell you the differences between the two. The scene I did notice was the one where Ripley speaks to Dallas, who's being kept alive by the alien. Personally, I'm glad this was cut out of the original, as it kills the pacing and doesn't match the tone of the sequence it's in. Aside from that scene, I ended up having to look up the other differences afterward, and I can confidently say I prefer the theatrical release. Each change the director's cut brought was either a downgrade or change I could live without. For the most part, they're the exact same movie though, and this classic is enjoyable either way. I figured I would enjoy Alien. After all, I love pretty much all things sci-fi, but I definitely didn't expect to like it as much as I did. When making a video, I'll usually watch a movie around 2 to 4 times, just so that I can catch as many details as I can before writing a script. And by the end of the whole process, I often feel just a bit burnt out on that particular film. Now there have been exceptions, like Whiplash, Fight Club, The Dark Knight, and Star Wars, just to name a few. But for the most part, it's just natural to get tired of a movie after having it be my life for a week. I never got to that point with Alien though. I enjoyed each rewatch as if it was my first, and it's a film that I'll definitely continue to revisit. The atmosphere of Alien, namely the production design and characters, was exactly what I looked for in my science fiction movies. That, combined with its short runtime at just under 2 hours, ensured that Alien cemented itself as an endlessly rewatchable classic. Needless to say, I'm excited to watch the second film in the series. 7 years after Alien, a sequel finally released. With James Cameron now at the helm, Aliens would bring the series in a bold new direction. And that's what we'll be discussing next week. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.